In the exclusive enclave of Westport Harbor, Connecticut, Maxwell Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, gazing at the yachts dotting the marina below. At 42, Max had everything a man could desire: a thriving investment firm, a waterfront mansion, a collection of luxury cars, and a social calendar filled with the right people at the right events. Yet as he swirled the aged bourbon in his crystal tumbler, a familiar emptiness gnawed at him. "Mr. Reed, your car is ready," announced Gretchen, his personal assistant. "Your dinner reservation at Harborview is in 30 minutes, and Mr. Wellington has already arrived." Max nodded without turning. Thomas Wellington was his oldest friend and business partner, though friend might be stretching the truth. Their relationship was like everything else in Max's life: transactional, polished, and ultimately hollow. "Tell James I'll be down in 5 minutes," he replied, referring to his driver. When Gretchen left, Max caught his reflection in the window. The tailored suit couldn't disguise the weariness in his eyes or the tight lines around his mouth. 5 years as Westport Harbor's most eligible widower had taught him to perform contentment convincingly, but lately the performance felt increasingly exhausting. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter, Olivia, away at boarding school in Vermont. The brief text, "Call when you can, nothing urgent," was typical of their relationship: polite, distant, punctuated by scheduled phone calls and holiday visits. Since Catherine's death, he'd kept Olivia at arm's length, unable to face how much she resembled her mother. Downstairs, the sleek black Mercedes waited at the curb. James, his driver of 7 years, held the door open. "Good evening, Mr. Reed." "Evening, James." The short drive to Harborview restaurant passed in silence, Max scrolling through emails, while James navigated the winding coastal roads lined with multi-million-dollar homes. This was his world: exclusive, insulated, predictable. At the restaurant, Thomas Wellington was already halfway through his first martini. "Max, you're looking grim. Market troubles?" "The market's fine," Max replied, taking his seat. "Just tired." Wellington signaled for another round. "You work too hard, my friend. Speaking of which, the River Point development is moving forward. We're finalizing the acquisition of those last few properties next week." Max nodded absently. The River Point development was their firm's biggest project to date, a luxury residential and commercial complex that would transform the old harbor district. Several holdouts were still refusing to sell, but that was merely a temporary inconvenience. "Harrison's team is handling the remaining negotiations," Wellington continued. "A few incentives should convince those small business owners to see reason. That old factory area is an eyesore anyway. We're doing the city a favor." Their conversation continued along familiar lines: investment strategies, potential acquisitions, golf tournament standings. When dinner concluded, Max declined Wellington's invitation to join him at the Harbor Club for drinks. "Another time, Thomas. I have some work to finish." On the drive home, a sudden downpour battered the Mercedes. Max stared out at the rain-slicked streets, feeling a mounting restlessness. "James, take a different route home, through downtown." If James was surprised, he didn't show it. "Yes, sir." The car turned away from the waterfront and headed toward the more modest part of town. As they passed through the old commercial district slated for demolition, Max found himself studying the small businesses: a local bookstore, a family-run pharmacy, a bakery with a faded awning. "Pull over here," Max instructed suddenly, pointing to a small storefront with a hand-painted sign reading, "Eleanor's Sweet Shop." "Sir, it's pouring rain." Just for a moment. Reluctantly, James pulled to the curb. Through the rain-streaked window, Max could see a woman inside the shop, wiping down counters. Despite the late hour and terrible weather, she was smiling slightly, as if privy to some private joy. Around her neck gleamed a delicate necklace that caught the light. Something about it seemed oddly familiar. Max felt an inexplicable pull toward the shop, toward this woman who seemed so content in her modest surroundings. Before he could analyze the impulse, he had opened the car door. "Wait here," he told James, and stepped into the rain. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, bringing with it a gust of wind. The woman looked up, surprise evident on her face at the sight of a drenched man in a $1,000 suit standing in her doorway. "I'm sorry, but we're closing," she said, her voice warm but firm. Max opened his mouth to respond, though he wasn't sure what he planned to say. Why had he entered this shop? What possible business could he have here? That's when he saw it clearly, the necklace around her throat. A delicate sapphire pendant with tiny seed pearls arranged in a distinctive pattern. His heart stopped. That necklace had been designed specifically for Catherine on their 10th anniversary. It was one of a kind, created by a jeweler in Paris who had worked exclusively from Max's sketches. Catherine had been wearing it the day her private plane went down over the Atlantic. Her body had never been recovered. "Where did you get that necklace?" The words emerged harsher than he intended, almost accusatory. The woman's hand instinctively rose to her throat, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "Excuse me?" "The necklace. Where did you get it?" Max took a step forward, suddenly desperate to know. Something in his eyes must have alarmed her, because she took a corresponding step back. "I don't see how that's any of your business, sir." But it was his business. That necklace belonged to his wife, his dead wife. It should be at the bottom of the ocean, not adorning the neck of a stranger in a small-town sweet shop. "My name is Maxwell Reed," he said, as if that would explain everything. In his world, it usually did. Recognition flickered in her eyes, not of the man, but of the name. Everyone in Westport Harbor knew the Reed family. "I'm Eleanor Price," she replied cautiously. "And we're closed, Mr. Reed." But Max couldn't leave. Not now. Not when the ghost of his past was literally hanging around this woman's neck. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows of the small shop. Inside, Max felt something shift, as if the carefully constructed walls of his existence had just developed their first crack. "That necklace," he said more quietly, "belonged to my wife." Eleanor's hand remained at her throat, but her expression softened slightly. "That's not possible. I bought this at a vintage jewelry store in New Haven 3 months ago." Max stepped closer. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the necklace. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor nodded. Max leaned in, examining the piece. There it was, the tiny engraving on the back of the sapphire setting, barely visible to the naked eye. K&M, always. His fingers trembled. Outside, James waited in the idling Mercedes, rain streaming down the windshield. Inside the sweet shop, Max stood transfixed, staring at a piece of his past that had somehow found its way back to him, carried by a stranger, whose gentle eyes now watched him with growing concern. In that moment, something inexplicable passed between them, a recognition that transcended their obvious differences. And despite all logic, despite the improbability of this moment, Maxwell Reed felt, for the first time in 5 years, fully awake. For 3 days, Maxwell Reed could think of nothing but the necklace and the woman who wore it. He'd left Eleanor's sweet shop that night with her business card and a promise that she would meet with him again to discuss the mysterious piece of jewelry. Now sitting in his corner office overlooking the harbor, he found himself staring at the small card, instead of reviewing the River Point development contracts that demanded his attention. Eleanor Price, Sweet Memories Bakery. Such a quaint, almost naive name for a business. Max traced his finger over the embossed lettering, recalling the woman's wary expression when he'd demanded to know about the necklace. She had good reason to be suspicious. He'd acted like a madman, barging into her shop at closing time, rain-soaked and aggressive. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Reed, Mr. Wellington is here for your 10 o'clock. Max tucked the card into his breast pocket. "Send him in." Thomas Wellington strode into the office with his customary confidence. "Max, ready to finalize the River Point." "Plans?" "The architectural team has the revised renderings." For the next hour, Max nodded and commented at appropriate intervals, as Wellington enthusiastically detailed how they would transform the old harbor district into a gleaming monument to luxury. The small businesses currently occupying the space, including Eleanor's Bakery, were discussed only in terms of buyout figures and relocation timetables. "We're facing resistance from the tenants in the Eastern Bloc," Wellington said, pointing to a section of the blueprints. "Particularly that bakery on the corner. The owner's being unreasonable about our offer. Max's attention sharpened. Which bakery? Sweet something or other, woman named Price, claims the place has sentimental value. Wellington made air quotes around the phrase. Everyone has their price, though. We'll just need to find hers. After Wellington left, Max cancelled his remaining meetings and instructed his driver to take him to the Harbour District. He told himself it was to assess the development site personally, but he knew his true destination before the car even pulled away from the curb. Eleanor's sweet shop was busy with the lunch crowd when Max arrived. He stood outside for a moment, observing through the window. Eleanor moved efficiently behind the counter, serving customers with genuine warmth. She wore her dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and yes, the sapphire necklace still hung around her neck, catching the light when she moved. Taking a deep breath, Max entered the shop. Several customers turned to look at him. His tailored suit and commanding presence were out of place in the homey establishment. Eleanor spotted him almost immediately, her smile faltering slightly before recovering. "Mr. Reed," she acknowledged when he reached the counter, "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Do you have a moment to talk?" he asked. Eleanor glanced at the line of customers. "As you can see, we're a bit busy. Could you come back around 3? We have a lull then." Max wasn't accustomed to being asked to wait, but he nodded. 3 o'clock. He spent the intervening hours walking the Harbour District, seeing it with new eyes. The buildings Wellington had dismissed as eyesores housed multi-generational businesses. Children played in a small park that would become underground parking, according to their plans. For the first time, Max wondered about the human cost of the River Point development. At precisely 3 o'clock, he returned to the bakery. The lunch rush had subsided, and only a few customers lingered at the tables by the window. Eleanor was wiping down the display case, but straightened when he entered. "Punctual," she observed. "Would you like some coffee? I was about to have a cup myself." Max accepted, and soon they were sitting at a small table in the back corner of the shop. Up close, he noticed details about Eleanor he'd missed during their first encounter. The laugh lines around her eyes, the slight dusting of flour on her sleeve, the confident way she carried herself despite her simple attire. "So," she said, after taking a sip of her coffee, "you believe this necklace belonged to your wife?" Max nodded. "I know it did. It was custom made." He hesitated, then added, "She was wearing it when she died, in a plane crash 5 years ago." Eleanor's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Reed, but I purchased this necklace from Hartley's Antiques in New Haven 3 months ago. The owner told me it had been part of an estate sale. May I?" Max gestured toward the necklace again. Eleanor hesitated, then unclasped it and handed it to him. Max examined it carefully, turning the pendant over to reveal the engraving he'd already confirmed during their first meeting. "This was our anniversary gift. I designed it myself." "If that's true, how did it end up in an antique store?" Eleanor asked. "That's what I need to find out." Max's voice was tight with emotion. "My wife's body was never recovered from the crash. Most of her personal effects were lost with her." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "And now one of those items has mysteriously reappeared." "Exactly." Max handed the necklace back to her. As she took it, their fingers brushed and he felt an unexpected jolt of connection. "I'd like to help you," Eleanor said, surprising him. "Whatever happened to your wife's necklace, it's clearly important to you to understand it." Max studied, her face searching for an ulterior motive, but found only genuine compassion. It was so foreign to his usual interactions that it left him momentarily speechless. "Why would you help me?" he finally asked. Eleanor smiled slightly. "Because you look like a man who needs answers, and perhaps because I'm curious too. It's not every day a stranger burst into my shop claiming my necklace belonged to his deceased wife." Before Max could respond, the shop door opened, admitting a teenage girl with a backpack slung over one shoulder. She stopped abruptly when she saw Max. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Max stood quickly. "Olivia, I thought you were at school." "It's the third Thursday, half day for faculty meetings." Olivia's tone suggested this was something he should have known. James picked me up at the train station. He said you were here. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, taking in the simple bakery setting with obvious confusion. This is Ms. Price, Maxie said awkwardly. She owns this bakery. Eleanor, please, Eleanor corrected, standing to offer her hand to Olivia. Your father and I were just discussing a piece of jewelry. Olivia shook the offered hand, her confusion deepening. Jewelry? It's complicated, Max said. We should go. I have meetings this afternoon. Eleanor retrieved a small box from behind the counter and packed 2 cookies into it. For the road, she said, handing it to Olivia with a genuine smile. Sugar and butter make everything better, at least temporarily. Olivia accepted the box with a surprised thank you, and Max felt a pang, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his daughter genuinely smile at a stranger. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor touched Max's arm lightly. Mr. Reed, Maxwell. I'm usually closed on Mondays, but I'll be here catching up on bookkeeping. If you'd like to continue our conversation then, I'll be here all day. Max nodded. Monday. Outside, Olivia waited until they were in the car before turning to him with raised eyebrows. Since when do you visit bakeries in the old district, and who is that woman? It's business, Max answered evasively. Business involving Mom's necklace? Olivia's voice was sharp. I'm not a child, Dad. I heard what she said. Max looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. At 17, Olivia had Catherine's delicate features and stubborn chin, but her eyes were all his, shrewd and observant, missing nothing. That woman, Eleanor, she has a necklace identical to one that belonged to your mother, he admitted. I'm trying to understand how that's possible. Olivia was silent for a long moment. Then, reaching into her pocket, she withdrew a folded photograph and handed it to Max. Is it this one? The photo showed Catherine lounging on the deck of their sailboat, laughing at something off camera. Around her neck glinted the sapphire pendant. Where did you get this? Max asked, stunned. He'd removed all photos of Catherine from their home after her death, unable to bear the constant reminders. Aunt Sarah gave me a box of Mum's things last year, Olivia said quietly. You were in London for that conference. She thought I should have them. Sarah, Catherine's sister, the one person Max had deliberately distanced himself from after the funeral. She'd been too raw in her grief, too insistent that he face his own. Dad, Olivia's voice pulled him back to the present. If Mom was wearing that necklace when she paused, unable to say the words. Then how does this baker have it now? The question hung between them. Father and daughter connected by a mystery neither understood. Outside the car window, the streets of Westport Harbor slid by, familiar territory suddenly filled with uncertainty. In his pocket, Max's fingers closed around Eleanor's business card. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Maxwell paced the length of his study, the morning sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with questions about the necklace. 5 years of carefully constructed normalcy were suddenly threatened by a simple piece of jewelry and the woman who wore it. You're wearing a path in that floor, Olivia observed from the doorway. Since their visit to Eleanor's bakery 2 days ago, his daughter had become an unexpected ally in his quest for answers. This morning she lounged against the doorframe in pajamas, watching him with eyes too perceptive for a 17-year-old. I'm thinking, Max replied. About Mom's necklace? Or about Eleanor? Max stopped pacing. The necklace, obviously. Olivia smiled slightly. If you say so. She entered the study and perched on the edge of his desk. I did some research last night about plane crashes and recovered items. What did you find? It's not unusual for personal effects to wash up on shores months or even years after a crash. Ocean currents, storms, they can move things in unpredictable ways. Max shook his head. Catherine's plane went down 200 miles off the coast, and the necklace would have been on her. He couldn't finish the sentence. I know, Olivia said gently, but there are other possibilities. Maybe she wasn't wearing it that day. Maybe someone took it from the house after. That's impossible. We had excellent security and nothing was ever reported missing. Olivia hesitated, then said, "There's another explanation, but you won't like it." Max raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Maybe Mom gave it to someone before the crash, a gift or—" "She wouldn't have. That necklace meant everything to her." The certainty in his voice brooked no argument. Catherine would never have parted with that necklace voluntarily. It had been a symbol of their enduring love, their unbreakable bond. A bond that, if he was being honest with himself, had been showing cracks long before her final flight. "Dad," Olivia said carefully, "have you considered talking to Aunt Sarah? She might know something." Max stiffened. Sarah had been Catherine's confidant, her trusted sister. After the funeral, she'd tried to tell Max things about Catherine he hadn't wanted to hear. About her unhappiness, her restlessness in their marriage. He'd shut her out, along with anyone else who threatened the pristine memory of his perfect wife and perfect marriage. "Your aunt and I don't exactly see eye to eye," he said tersely. "Maybe it's time to change that," Olivia suggested. Before Max could respond, she added, "I'm meeting her for lunch today. You could join us." The invitation hung in the air between them. Max checked his watch, a reflexive action. "I have meetings all afternoon." "Cancel them," Olivia said simply. "This is more important." Looking at his daughter, Max saw Catherine's determination in the set of her jaw. It was the same expression his wife had worn when arguing for what mattered to her, which, toward the end, had rarely included him. "I'll see what I can do," he conceded. Several hours later, Max found himself sitting across from Sarah Williams at an upscale cafe in downtown Westport Harbor. The tension between them was palpable, 5 years of silence and unspoken accusations creating an invisible barrier that even Olivia's cheerful attempts at conversation couldn't penetrate. "I never expected to see you here, Max," Sarah said finally after they'd ordered. Olivia said it was important. Max glanced at his daughter, who nodded encouragingly. "It's about Catherine's sapphire necklace," he said, "the one I had made for our anniversary." Sarah's expression revealed nothing. "What about it?" "I've found it. Or rather, it found me. A woman in town has it. Says she bought it from an antique dealer in New Haven." Sarah's composure slipped momentarily, shock flickering across her features before she controlled it. "That's unexpected." "It's impossible," Max countered, "unless someone took it from our home after Catherine's death, or unless—" He couldn't bring himself to voice the alternative. Sarah set down her water glass carefully. "Unless Catherine wasn't wearing it when the plane went down." "She wore it every day," Max insisted. "She was wearing it the morning she left for the airport. I remember saying goodbye to her, seeing it around her neck." A heavy silence fell over the table. Olivia looked between her father and aunt, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "There's something you should know, Max," Sarah said finally. "Catherine came to see me the day before that flight. She was upset, more than upset. She was resolved." Max felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. "Resolved about what?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "About leaving you. She'd been unhappy. For years, Max. You were so consumed with your business, with appearances, with control. She felt like a possession rather than a partner." The words hit Max like physical blows. "You're lying." "Dad?" Olivia interjected. "Let her finish." Sarah reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, slightly yellowed with age. "She left this with me, asked me to give it to you if anything happened to her. After the crash, I tried, but you wouldn't see me, wouldn't talk to me." She placed the envelope on the table. "It's time you read it." Max stared at the envelope, recognizing Catherine's elegant handwriting spelling out his name. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. "I'll leave you to read it privately," Sarah said, standing. She touched Olivia's shoulder gently. "I'll wait for you in the bookstore next door, sweetheart." When Sarah had gone, Olivia touched her father's hand. "Do you want me to go too?" Max shook his head. "Stay." He needed her there. This daughter who was so much like her mother, as he finally confronted the truth he'd been avoiding for 5 years. With unsteady fingers, he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Max, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I want you to know that despite everything, I have always loved you, even when loving you became the hardest thing I've ever done. Our marriage hasn't been real for a long time. You've built walls around yourself so high that even I can't reach you anymore. Your need for control, for perfection, has suffocated the man I married. The man who once dreamed alongside me instead of dictating my dreams. I'm leaving, Max. Not just for a business trip, but for good. I've found a small place in Maine, where I can paint again, where I can breathe. I've asked Sarah to help me start over. I've left the sapphire necklace with her. It was a beautiful gift, but it's come to feel like a beautiful collar. I hope one day you'll understand why I couldn't keep it. Take care of Olivia. Don't shut her out the way you've shut me out. She deserves better from both of us. Catherine. Max read the letter 3 times, each word burning into his consciousness. She'd been leaving him. The plane crash hadn't taken her from him. She had already decided to go. Dad? Olivia's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you okay? Max folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Your mother was unhappy, he said, his voice hollow. She was leaving me. Olivia's expression revealed no surprise, only a deep sadness. I think I always knew something wasn't right. You and Mom, there was so much silence in the house before she died. Max felt a sudden, overwhelming need to see Eleanor, this woman who now wore Catherine's discarded necklace, as if the universe had orchestrated their meeting precisely when he needed to face the truth about his marriage. I need to go, he said abruptly, standing up. There's someone I need to talk to. Eleanor? Olivia asked. Max nodded. I'll have James take you home. No, Olivia said firmly. I'm coming with you. 20 minutes later, they stood outside Eleanor's sweet shop, but the closed sign hung in the window. Through the glass, they could see her working in the back, unaware of their presence. Max knocked on the door, perhaps more forcefully than necessary. Eleanor looked up, startled. Recognition crossed her face when she saw Max, and after a moment's hesitation, she came to unlock the door. Mr. Reed, she said, her eyes moving to Olivia. And Olivia, I'm actually closed today for inventory. I need to talk to you, Max said. It's important. Something in his expression must have conveyed his urgency, because Eleanor stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, then. Inside, the bakery smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Trays of pastries lined the counters, and flour dusted Eleanor's apron. Here in this simple, honest space, Max felt the full weight of the artificial world he'd constructed crumbling around him. I know where the necklace came from, he said, without preamble. My wife gave it to her sister before she died. She was planning to leave me. Eleanor's eyes widened. Max, I'm so sorry. All this time I've been mourning a marriage that was already over. The bitter truth of it washed over him. I drove her away with my controlling nature, my obsession with appearances, and then I spent 5 years building a shrine to a lie. Olivia moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. Dad, it wasn't all a lie. Mum loved you. She said so in her letter. Eleanor watched them, compassion in her eyes. Sometimes love changes shape, she said gently. It doesn't mean it wasn't real. How would you know? Max asked, more sharply than he intended. If Eleanor was offended, she didn't show it. Because I've been there, she said simply. My husband left me 3 years ago, said I was too focused on this bakery, too ordinary for the life he wanted. The parallel wasn't lost on Max, so you understand what it's like to be left behind. I understand what it's like to realize that sometimes holding on too tightly is what makes people want to leave, Eleanor corrected gently. Max glanced around. The bakery, at the worn but spotlessly clean counters, the handwritten menu, the framed photographs of smiling customers on the wall. This place was Eleanor's creation, her passion. There was a genuineness to it that had been missing from his life for longer than he cared to admit. The necklace belongs to you now, he said, surprising himself. Catherine would have wanted someone to wear it who understood its value beyond the price of the stones. Eleanor's hand went to the pendant at her throat. I don't know what to say. Say you'll wear it, Olivia suggested, and maybe say you'll share the recipe for those amazing cookies you gave me the other day? Eleanor laughed, the sound brightening the somber atmosphere. That I can definitely do. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor handed Max a small package. Apple cinnamon bread, she explained, freshly baked this morning. Consider it a peace offering for your new beginning. New beginning? Max repeated. Every revelation, even a painful one, is a chance to start again, Eleanor said. At least, that's what my grandmother always told me. Outside, as they walked back to the car, Olivia looked at her father expectantly. So? What now? Max considered the question. For 5 years, he'd been living in suspended animation, anchored to a past that hadn't even been real. Now, paradoxically, the truth about Catherine's unhappiness had set something free within him. Now, he said slowly, I think it's time we both stopped living with ghosts. In his pocket, Catherine's letter seemed to burn against his chest, not with the fire of betrayal, but with the steady heat of long overdue truth. And somehow, in the midst of this painful revelation, Max felt the first tentative stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Max sat alone in his study, Catherine's letter spread before him on the mahogany desk. Around him, the house was silent. Olivia had gone back to school the previous day, but not before extracting a promise that he would call her every evening. Not their usual perfunctory check-ins, but real conversations. Outside, rain pelted against the windows, a fitting backdrop to the storm of emotions he'd been weathering since discovering the truth about Catherine's planned departure. For the third time that evening, he read her words, searching for nuances he might have missed. Your need for control, for perfection, has suffocated the man I married, the man who once dreamed alongside me instead of dictating my dreams. Had he really changed so much? Had success hardened him that completely? Max tried to remember the man he'd been when he and Catherine first met, an ambitious but idealistic young entrepreneur with big plans and an even bigger heart. Somewhere along the way, that heart had calcified, protected by layers of achievement and material wealth. The doorbell rang, pulling him from his introspection. Max glanced at his watch. Nearly 9 p.m., an unusual hour for visitors. Martha, his housekeeper, had already left for the evening. When he opened the door, Thomas Wellington stood on the doorstep, an expensive bottle of scotch in one hand and an irritated expression on his face. You've been avoiding me, Wellington said, brushing past Max into the foyer. I've been busy, Max replied, closing the door. Too busy to return calls about the most important development of our careers, Wellington headed for the study as if he owned the place. The River Point deal is falling apart, Max. Those holdouts in the Eastern Bloc are organizing against us. They've hired a lawyer. Max followed him into the study, watching as Wellington helped himself to a glass and poured a generous measure of scotch. Which holdouts specifically? The whole group of them. The bookstore, that feminist art gallery, and that damned bakery. Wellington took a deep swallow of his drink. Sweet something. The woman who owns it is leading the charge. Eleanor. Of course it would be Eleanor. Max recalled her quiet determination. The way she'd built her business from nothing after her divorce. She wouldn't be easily intimidated. Maybe we should reconsider the Eastern Bloc, Max suggested, pouring himself a more modest drink. Work around those businesses instead of displacing them. Wellington stared at him incredulously. Are you serious? That would require a complete redesign, not to mention reducing our profit margin by at least 15%. There are considerations beyond profit margin, Thomas. Since when? Wellington's eyes narrowed. What's gotten into you, Max? First you start missing meetings, then you question the River Point strategy. Now you're talking about considerations. Beyond profit. This isn't like you. No, Max thought, it wasn't like the person he'd become. But perhaps it was like the person he'd once been, the one Catherine had loved before ambition and control had consumed him. People's livelihoods are at stake, Max said. Multi-generational businesses, community landmarks. Wellington scoffed. We're improving the community, bringing in high-end retail, luxury condos, upscale restaurants. It's progress, Max. Since when do you stand in the way of progress? since I started questioning what progress actually means. Max turned to face Wellington directly. "I want to put the River Point development on hold, temporarily," he added when he saw Wellington's expression darken, "just until we can reassess its impact." Wellington set his glass down with a sharp click. "This is about that bakery woman, isn't it? Eleanor Price." When Max didn't immediately deny it, Wellington laughed humorlessly. "Good God, Max. Don't tell me you've fallen for some small-town baker with a sob story. What is she, your midlife crisis?" "Don't be crude," Max snapped. "This has nothing to do with Eleanor personally." "Then what?" "Because the Max Reed I know doesn't suddenly develop a social conscience over nothing. Something's changed." Max considered how much to reveal. Wellington had been his friend, or the closest thing to it, for over a decade. But he'd also been complicit in Max's transformation into someone Catherine had ultimately wanted to escape. "I've learned some things about Catherine recently," Max said finally, "about her unhappiness in our marriage. It's made me reconsider certain choices." Wellington's expression softened slightly. "Max, it's been 5 years. Catherine's gone. Whatever issues you had in your marriage, they're in the past. Don't let guilt over a dead woman derail everything we've worked for." The casual dismissal of Catherine, of her feelings, her plans, her very existence, ignited something in Max. "That dead woman was my wife, the mother of my child, and she was right about me. I've become exactly what she feared, someone who values buildings and profit margins over people and communities." "You're being melodramatic," Wellington said, refilling his glass. "We've created thousands of jobs, revitalized entire neighborhoods, by pricing out the original residents and businesses," Max interrupted, "by replacing character with homogeneity. When did we stop caring about the human cost, Thomas?" "We're businessmen, not social workers," Wellington replied coldly. "If you're having some sort of existential crisis, deal with it on your own time. The River Point development proceeds as planned." Max straightened. "Not without my approval, it doesn't. And I'm not giving it. Not until we've revised the plans to preserve the Eastern Bloc." Wellington's face flushed with anger. "You can't do this. The board won't stand for it." "I own 51% of the company, Thomas. The board will stand for whatever I tell them to." The two men stared at each other. Decades of friendship and partnership balanced against this sudden, fundamental disagreement. Finally, Wellington drained his glass and set it down. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "When you come to your senses, call me. Until then, I'll do damage control with our investors." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One question. Is she worth it? This baker with Catherine's necklace?" Max thought of Eleanor, her quiet strength, her genuineness, the way she'd built something meaningful from the ashes of her own failed marriage. "This isn't about Eleanor," he said again. But yes, I think people like her are worth protecting." After Wellington left, Max returned to his desk where Catherine's letter still lay open. Beside it, he'd placed the single photograph of her that he'd kept, not one of the formal portraits that adorned their public spaces, but a candid shot taken on their honeymoon. Catherine laughing on a beach in Maui, her hair wild in the wind, looking at him with such love it still took his breath away. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the image. "I forgot who we were supposed to be." His phone rang, jolting him from the moment. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Max Reed," he answered. "Mr. Reed, this is Diane Lawson. I own the bookstore next to Eleanor's bakery." The woman's voice was tense. "There's been a fire. Eleanor's shop. It's bad. She's at Westport General." Max felt the blood drain from his face. Was she hurt? Smoke inhalation. They're keeping her overnight for observation. But the bakery? It's mostly gone. "I'll be right there." Max grabbed his keys, his mind racing. A fire just hours after Wellington learned Eleanor was organizing resistance to the River Point development. It seemed too coincidental. The hospital was only 15 minutes from his home, but the drive felt interminable. By the time he arrived, visiting hours were technically over, but the Reed name opened doors, even at this hour. Eleanor's room was on the 3rd floor. Max paused outside, suddenly uncertain. What right did he have to be here? They barely knew each other, yet something pulled him forward. Concern, yes, but also a strange sense of responsibility. He knocked softly and entered. Eleanor lay in the hospital bed, an oxygen tube in her nose, her face pale against the white sheets. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her features. "Max, what are you doing here?" "I heard about the fire. Are you all right?" Eleanor attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Physically, yes, just some smoke inhalation. They want to keep me overnight as a precaution." Her voice broke slightly. "The bakery didn't fare as well." Max moved closer to the bed. "What happened?" "Electrical fire, they think. Started in the back storage room." Eleanor's fingers twisted in the hospital blanket. "It spread so quickly. By the time the fire department arrived, the kitchen was gone. Everything's gone, Max. The equipment, supplies, my grandmother's recipes." Her voice trailed off. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor." Max hesitated, then asked, "Insurance?" A shadow crossed her face. "Minimal. It barely covered the building, let alone the contents. And with all my savings tied up in fighting the River Point development," she shook her head. "I don't know what I'm going to do." Max felt a stab of guilt. His development, his company, was already destroying her livelihood, even before the fire. "The timing seems suspicious," he said carefully. "Right after you organized opposition to River Point." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You think it was deliberate? Arson?" "I don't know," Max admitted, "but I intend to find out." Eleanor studied his face. "Why are you here, Max? Really?" It was a fair question. Why had he rushed to the hospital for a woman he barely knew? Was it guilt, attraction, or something deeper? A recognition of someone authentic in a world of facades? "Because I think I might be responsible in a way," he said honestly. "My partner was furious about your opposition to the development, and because..." He hesitated, searching for words. "Because you remind me of someone I used to be, before ambition and control took over." Eleanor's expression softened. "We all lose our way sometimes. The important thing is finding it again." Without thinking, Max reached for her hand. It was small in his, calloused from years of kneading dough and carrying trays. A working hand, honest and strong. "I'm going to help you rebuild," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Whatever it takes." Eleanor started to protest, but a coughing fit interrupted her. When it subsided, she looked exhausted. "We barely know each other, Max." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you built something meaningful from nothing. I know you stood up against powerful interests to protect not just your business, but your entire community. And I know that the world needs more Eleanor Prices and fewer Maxwell Reeds." Eleanor's eyes were growing heavy with exhaustion and medication. "Promise me something," she murmured. "Anything. Promise me you're not just trying to ease your conscience." Max squeezed her hand gently. "I promise this isn't about guilt. It's about finally doing what's right, not what's profitable." As Eleanor drifted into sleep, Max remained by her bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over Westport Harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, and with it a chance to be the man he should have been all along, the man Catherine had loved, the man Olivia deserved as a father, the man who put people before profit. Max Reed had spent 5 years building monuments to a marriage that had been crumbling beneath him. Perhaps now it was time to build something real. 3 weeks after the fire, Max stood in the charred remains of Eleanor's sweet shop, surveying the damage in the harsh light of a New England autumn morning. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air, mingling with the underlying sense of sugar and cinnamon that had somehow survived the destruction. Blackened beams crisscrossed above him, and the expensive Italian espresso machine Eleanor had saved for 2 years to purchase lay in melted ruins against one wall. "The insurance company finally came through with their assessment," Eleanor said, stepping carefully through the debris to join him. "They're calling it an electrical malfunction, case closed." "Convenient," Max remarked. The fire marshal's investigation had been suspiciously brief, and despite Max's insistence on a more thorough review, the case had been quickly closed. No evidence of foul play, they'd said, just bad luck. Max didn't believe in luck, bad or otherwise, not anymore. The good news, Eleanor continued, brushing ash from her hands, is that they're releasing the funds today. Not enough to rebuild properly, but enough to start. Since the fire, Eleanor had been operating a small pop-up bakery from the community center kitchen, keeping her business limping along while she fought insurance companies and building inspectors. Max had watched her resilience with growing admiration. Where others might have given up, she persisted, reworking recipes from memory to replace her grandmother's lost cookbook, rallying the other small business owners to continue their fight against River Point. I had my financial team draw up some options for a rebuild, Max said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Low-interest loans, community development grants, even some private investment opportunities. Eleanor took the folder but didn't open it. Why are you doing this, Max? Your company still owns the River Point development rights. Our interests are directly opposed. It was a fair question, one Max had been asking himself for weeks. The board of Reed Development was in an uproar over his sudden change of heart regarding River Point. Wellington had been rallying support against him, suggesting to key investors that Max was having some sort of breakdown. His reputation as a ruthless, clear-headed businessman was being questioned for the first time in his career. And yet, standing amid the ruins of Eleanor's dream, Max felt more certain of his path than he had in years. Not anymore, he said quietly. I've officially withdrawn Reed Development from the River Point project. Eleanor stared at him, disbelief written across her features. You what? But that was a multi-million-dollar development. It was, Max agreed. But I've been doing some soul-searching these past few weeks about the kind of legacy I want to leave, the kind of father I want to be to Olivia, the kind of man I want to be, period. And what kind of man is that? Eleanor asked softly. Max looked around at the ruined bakery, at this place that represented everything his business model typically destroyed in the name of progress. The kind who builds things that matter, not just things that make money. He met her eyes. I've spent my career tearing down places like this to make room for luxury condos and upscale boutiques. I've displaced families, erased history, all in the name of profit. And for what? To add another zero to my bank account, to impress people I don't even like? Eleanor was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. That's quite a transformation, Max. I had a good teacher, he replied with a small smile. A baker who reminded me that authentic happiness can't be built on foundations of greed and control. A faint blush colored Eleanor's cheeks, but before she could respond, the door to the bakery opened, admitting Olivia. Since the fire, Max's daughter had been spending every weekend and school holiday at home, volunteering at Eleanor's pop-up bakery and throwing herself wholeheartedly into the fight against River Point. Dad, did you tell her yet? Olivia asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Tell me what? Eleanor looked between father and daughter suspiciously. Not yet, Max said. I was building up to it. Well, hurry up, Olivia urged. The others will be here soon and I want to see her face when you tell her. Eleanor folded her arms. Now I'm worried. What exactly are you two plotting? Max took a deep breath. I've established a community development fund for the Eastern Bloc. Seed money to help small businesses affected by predatory development practices, starting with yours. Eleanor's eyes widened. Max, I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Max insisted. It's reparation in a way, for what companies like mine have done to communities like yours, and it comes with no strings attached. You rebuild however you want, whatever you want. I'm just providing resources. That's not all, Olivia interjected, unable to contain herself. Dad's turning the old Reed warehouse on Harborview into a community marketplace, affordable retail, spaces for local businesses, a farmer's market, art studios. He's calling it Catherine's Place. Max shot his daughter a look. I was going to ease into that part. Catherine's Place, Eleanor repeated, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the sapphire necklace she still wore. After your wife? Max nodded. Catherine was an artist before we married. She loved community spaces, local artisans, places with character and history. As time went on, I pushed her to conform to my world of galas and corporate functions. I never understood how much she resented that until it was too late. He paused, memories washing over him. This feels like something she would have wanted, a way to honor who she really was, not who I tried to make her be. Eleanor was silent, for a long moment processing everything. Finally, she asked, "And what does Thomas Wellington think of all this?" Max grimaced. "Thomas and I have parted ways, professionally speaking. He's bought out my shares in our joint ventures and I've bought out his. He'll continue with the high-end developments and I'll focus on community revitalization." "That must have been difficult," Eleanor said. "You were partners for a long time." "We were," Max agreed, "but we were heading in different directions. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." The door opened again, admitting a small group of people. The owners of the bookstore, the art gallery, and the other small businesses that made up the Eastern Bloc. They'd organized into a formal coalition after the fire, with Eleanor as their unofficial leader. "Is it true?" asked Diane from the bookstore, her eyes fixed on Max. "Has Reed Development really withdrawn from River Point?" "It's true," Max confirmed, "and I've come with a proposal for an alternative development plan, one that preserves the Eastern Bloc and provides resources for its revitalization." For the next hour, Max outlined his vision for a community-centered development approach. Where River Point would have demolished and replaced, his new plan would restore and enhance. Historic facades would be preserved, affordable housing would be incorporated alongside market-rate units, and local businesses would be given priority in commercial spaces. "Why the change of heart?" asked Jerome, the skeptical owner of the record store. "No offense, Mr. Reed, but men like you don't suddenly develop a conscience without reason." It was a fair question, one that Max had anticipated. These people had fought against his company for months. Their suspicion was well earned. "You're right to question my motives," Max acknowledged. 3 months ago, I was a different person. Someone who measured success in square footage and profit margins. Then I met Eleanor, and through her, all of you. I saw what community really means, and I rediscovered some truths about myself that I'd forgotten. "What truths?" Jerome pressed. Max hesitated, then decided on complete honesty that I'd become exactly the kind of man my late wife was planning to leave. The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Catherine was unhappy with who I'd become, controlling, obsessed with appearances and status. She died before she could leave me, but she'd already made the decision. He looked around at the group. "I can't change the past, but I can choose a different future, one that honors what Catherine valued: authenticity, creativity, community." A heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor moved to stand beside Max, her presence a silent show of support. "I don't expect your trust immediately," Max continued. "I've done nothing to earn it, but I hope you'll consider my proposal. Not because it comes from me, but because it might be what's best for this community." After the meeting dispersed, with the business owners taking copies of Max's proposal to review, Eleanor and Max walked along the harbor. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt water and approaching winter. "That took courage," Eleanor said finally, telling them about Catherine, about her plans to leave. Max shrugged. "It's the truth. I've spent 5 years hiding from it, pretending my marriage was perfect, that Catherine's death was the only tragedy. But the real tragedy started long before that plane went down." "We all have our fictions," Eleanor said softly. "After my divorce, I told everyone it was mutual, amicable. I couldn't admit that David left me for his 25-year-old assistant, that he told me I was too ordinary, too content with a small life." Max stopped walking, turning to face her. "There's nothing ordinary about you, Eleanor Price. You're the most authentic person I've ever met." Eleanor smiled, a hint of her old sadness in her eyes. "That necklace you designed for Catherine, it really is beautiful. I've always wondered why the person who sold it to the antique shop would part with something so special. Maybe it needed to find you," Max said without thinking, "to bring us together." The words hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. "Max," Eleanor began cautiously, "I'm flattered by everything you're doing, but if this is about—" "It's not," Max interrupted gently. This isn't about romantic feelings, or misplaced guilt, or even atonement. It's about finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. You helped catalyze that change, but the journey is mine." Eleanor studied his face, as if searching for any sign of insincerity. "And what about Wellington? He doesn't strike me as the type to accept defeat gracefully." Max's expression darkened. "Thomas has connections I don't. Political allies, friends in regulatory agencies. He's blocking the permits for Catherine's place, spreading rumors about my mental stability, even suggesting to our investors that I've been embezzling funds. That's slander. It's business, Eleanor, the kind I used to practice myself." Max sighed. "The irony doesn't escape me." "What will you do?" "Fight, but ethically. I have evidence of some of Thomas's more questionable business practices. Nothing illegal, but certainly immoral. I've never used it because—" Max trailed off, realizing the truth as he spoke it. "Because I was no better than he was." Eleanor touched his arm, her eyes full of compassion. "But you're trying to be better now. That counts for something." "I hope so," Max said quietly. They continued walking, the conversation turning to plans for rebuilding Eleanor's bakery. As they discussed kitchen layouts and equipment options, Max felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. Here, engaged. In something constructive rather than destructive. He felt glimpses of the man he'd once been, the man Catherine had fallen in love with, the man who valued connection over acquisition. That evening, Max sat in his study, drafting a letter to Wellington, not a letter of apology or reconciliation, but a clear boundary. Max would pursue his new vision, with or without his former partner's blessing. If Wellington continued his campaign of obstruction, Max would be forced to reveal what he knew about certain business practices that wouldn't withstand public scrutiny. As he sealed the envelope, Max's phone rang. It was Olivia. "Dad, have you seen the news? It's all over social media. Wellington's calling an emergency board meeting to vote you out as CEO. He's saying you're mentally unstable, that you've been making irrational business decisions because of your relationship with Eleanor." Max felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Wellington had always fought dirty. "When is the meeting?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Olivia's voice was tight with worry. "Dad, can he really do this? Can they just remove you?" "Not without my shares, they can't," Max assured her. "I still own controlling interest in Reed Development." "But that's just it," Olivia said urgently. "Wellington is claiming that your mental state invalidates your recent decisions, including your refusal to move forward with Riverpoint. He's invoking some obscure clause in the company bylaws about temporary stewardship in case of incapacitation." "That's absurd," Max said sharply. "No court would uphold it." "It doesn't have to hold up forever," Olivia pointed out. "Just long enough for them to push through Riverpoint before you can stop it." After hanging up, Max stared at the phone in his hand. Tomorrow morning would determine not just the fate of his company, but of Eleanor's bakery, the Eastern Bloc, and everything he now believed in. If Wellington succeeded in his power play, even temporarily, bulldozers could be at the Eastern Bloc within days. Max had a choice to make: fight to maintain control of the empire he'd built, or sacrifice it all to protect what truly mattered. In Saint-Pé's, his mind's eye, he saw Catherine's face, as she must have looked writing her final letter to him, torn between love for the man he'd been and despair over the man he'd become. He saw Olivia at Eleanor's pop-up bakery, flour on her cheeks, laughing with customers. He saw Eleanor standing amid the ruins of her shop, refusing to be defeated. Max Reed had spent a lifetime building towers of glass and steel. Perhaps it was time to build something that couldn't be measured in square footage or property values. Reaching for his phone again, Max made a call he'd been avoiding for 5 years. "Sarah? It's Max. I need your help." The boardroom of Reed Development fell silent as Maxwell Reed placed a stack of documents on the polished mahogany table. Around him sat the 12 members of the board, their expressions ranging from concerned to hostile. At the far end, Thomas Wellington watched with barely concealed triumph, certain that this emergency meeting would end with Max's removal as CEO. "Before we proceed with this vote of no confidence," Max said calmly, "I'd like to introduce someone." The door opened and Sarah Williams entered. Catherine's sister had aged gracefully in the 5 years since Max had last seen her, her resemblance to his late wife still striking enough to cause a murmur among board members familiar with Catherine. "This is Sarah Williams, my late wife's sister," Max said. "She has information relevant to these proceedings." Wellington shifted uncomfortably. "This is highly irregular, Max. Family drama has no place in a board meeting." "On the contrary," Max replied, "since you've based your motion for my removal on claims about my mental state following revelations about my marriage, I believe Sarah's testimony is directly relevant." Turning to Sarah, he nodded. "Please tell them what you told me last night." Sarah stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on Wellington. 5 years ago, shortly before her death, my sister Catherine came to me. She was planning to leave Max, a fact he's recently discovered and has been openly addressing as part of his personal growth. She paused, her voice steady despite the difficult subject. What Max didn't know until last night was that Thomas Wellington was aware of Catherine's plans. In fact, he actively encouraged her to leave quietly, without public controversy that might affect the company's image or stock price. All eyes turned to Wellington, whose face had drained of color. "That's absurd," he sputtered. "I barely knew." "Catherine." Sarah reached into her bag and withdrew a small leather-bound journal. "This is Catherine's diary. In it she details several conversations with you, Mr. Wellington, including one where you offered her a significant financial incentive to ensure her departure would be discreet and wouldn't impact pending business deals." The air in the room grew heavy with tension. Max watched Wellington's expression shift from shock to calculation. "Even if that were true," Wellington said finally, "it was in the best interest of the company. Marital scandal could have tanked our stock. I was protecting our shareholders." "By prioritizing profit over basic human decency," Max asked quietly, "by treating my wife, your friend's wife, as a potential liability to be managed rather than a person in pain?" He shook his head. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I'm working to change at Reed Development." Max opened the folder before him and distributed documents to each board member. "These are the financial projections for my community revitalization plan, including Catherine's place. As you'll see, the projected return on investment over 5 years is actually higher than Riverpoint, with significantly lower initial capital requirements and virtually no community opposition." The board members began reviewing the documents, murmurs of surprise rippling around the table. "Additionally," Max continued, "I've included documentation of certain business practices Mr. Wellington has engaged in while representing Reed Development." He turned to his former partner. "Nothing explicitly illegal, Thomas, but certainly practices that would concern our more ethically minded investors and partners." Wellington leapt to his feet. "This is blackmail." "This is transparency," Max corrected, "something our company has been sorely lacking. You taught me well, Thomas. Always have leverage. The difference is, I'm not threatening to use this information. I'm simply providing context for the board to make an informed decision about leadership." For 2 hours, the board deliberated. Arguments grew heated, figures were questioned, and past decisions scrutinized. Through it all, Max maintained his composure, answering every question honestly. He acknowledged his failings, his neglect of Olivia, his blindness to Catherine's unhappiness. He didn't paint himself as a hero or Wellington as a villain, merely as two men with fundamentally different values. When the vote finally came, Max retained his position by the narrowest of margins. Wellington resigned on the spot, vowing to start his own development firm that wouldn't be hamstrung by sentimentality and misguided social conscience. As the board members filed out, many still visibly conflicted about the morning's revelations, Sarah approached Max. "Catherine would be proud of you today," she said quietly. "Not because you won, but because you fought for something that mattered." Max nodded, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I should have listened to her years." "Ego to you, I'm sorry, Sarah." "We can't change the past," Sarah replied, echoing Eleanor's words. but we can honor it by doing better now. Outside the Reed Development Tower, Max found Eleanor waiting. She'd refused his offer to attend the meeting, saying this was his battle to fight, but had promised to meet him after, regardless of the outcome. "Well?" she asked, searching his face. "Are you still CEO of Reed Development?" "I am," Max confirmed, by one vote. Eleanor's face broke into a relieved smile. "So the Eastern Bloc is safe? Catherine's place will happen?" "Yes, to both," Max said. "And there's more. The board has approved my proposal to establish a community development fund, starting with financing the complete rebuild of Sweet Memories Bakery." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Max, that's wonderful, but—" "No strings attached," he interrupted. "No naming rights, no Reed Development logos, nothing. Consider it reparation for years of corporate policies that valued profit over people." They walked together toward the waterfront, where the autumn sunlight sparkled on the harbor. In the months since their first encounter over Catherine's necklace, Westport Harbor had begun to feel like a different place to Max. Less a showcase for wealth and status, more a living community with history and character. "Olivia asked me to remind you about dinner tonight," Eleanor said as they walked. "She's attempting your mother's lasagna recipe, God help us all." Max laughed. "I'll bring fire extinguishers." The easy familiarity between them felt natural now. Olivia had taken to Eleanor immediately, finding in her the warmth and authenticity that had been missing from her life. With Eleanor's guidance, she discovered a passion for baking and a talent for connecting with people that had surprised and delighted Max. His daughter was becoming her own person, not Catherine's shadow or Max's heir, but uniquely herself. I visited Catherine's grave this morning," Max said after a comfortable silence. "First time in 5 years." Eleanor glanced at him. "How was it?" "Harder than I expected, easier than I feared." Max paused, gathering his thoughts. "I told her about you, about Olivia, about Catherine's place. I told her I was sorry for who I became, but that I was working on being better." Eleanor slipped her hand into his, a gesture of simple comfort. "I think she knows." They reached the site of the future Catherine's place, currently just an old warehouse with faded Reed Development signs, but soon to be transformed into a vibrant community hub. Construction was set to begin next month, with several of the Eastern Bloc businesses already signed on as anchor tenants. "Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed," Max said, looking up at the building. 6 months ago, all I cared about was the next acquisition, the next deal. I was sleepwalking through my life. And now?" Eleanor asked. Max turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Now I'm wide awake. Because of Catherine's letter, because of Olivia's courage in showing me who she really is, because of Sarah's forgiveness." He squeezed Eleanor's hands gently. "And because of you, a woman brave enough to stand up to Maxwell, Reed and his corporate machine." Eleanor smiled, the sapphire necklace catching the light as she moved. "I've been thinking about this necklace," she said, her fingers touching the pendant. "It's had such a journey, from you to Catherine, from Catherine to Sarah, from Sarah to the world, and eventually to me, almost as if it had a purpose." "To bring us together," Max suggested, echoing words he'd spoken weeks earlier. "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, "but I think it might be time for its next journey." She reached behind her neck and unclasped the necklace. "This belongs with Olivia. It's part of her mother, part of her history." Max felt a surge of emotion as Eleanor placed the necklace in his palm. "Are you sure? You love this necklace?" "I do," Eleanor admitted, "but it was always on loan, in a way. A beautiful messenger that served its purpose." Her eyes met his, warm and certain. "Besides, I don't need a necklace to remind me of what matters anymore. I have the real thing right here." That evening, in Eleanor's small apartment above the temporary bakery space, Max presented the necklace to Olivia. His daughter's eyes filled with tears as she recognized the piece from photographs of her mother. "It's beautiful," she whispered, letting Max fasten it around her neck. "It was your mother's favorite," Max told her. "She would want you to have." Olivia touched the sapphire gently. "Will you tell me about her? The real her, not just the perfect version in the photographs. So Max did. As the three of them prepared dinner together in Eleanor's tiny kitchen, he shared stories of the Catherine he'd first fallen in love with, her passion for art, her wicked sense of humor, her stubborn insistence on enjoying the simple pleasures of life. He spoke of her flaws too, her impatience, her occasional tendency to withdraw rather than confront problems directly, her inability to fold laundry without creating more wrinkles than she removed. Eleanor listened, adding her own observations from the diary entries Sarah had shared, building a more complete picture of a complex woman neither of them had truly known. Together they helped Olivia discover the mother behind the Saint Max had created in death, a real woman, flawed and beautiful, who would have been immensely proud of the young woman her daughter had become. As they sat down to eat Olivia's imperfect but heartfelt lasagna, Max looked around the table and felt a profound sense of rightness. This wasn't the life he'd planned or the family he'd envisioned, but it was real in a way his previous existence had never been. 6 months ago, Maxwell Reed had stood at the window of his penthouse, surrounded by luxury but hollow inside, playing a role he no longer recognized. Tonight, he sat in a modest apartment eating slightly overcooked pasta, listening to his daughter and Eleanor debate the merits of different vanilla extracts for baking. The sapphire necklace glinted at Olivia's throat, catching the light as she gestured animatedly. Catherine's gift had completed its journey, finding its way home at last, just as Max, in his own way, had finally found his. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting Westport Harbor with fresh white promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding Eleanor's bakery, breaking ground on Catherine's place, continuing to transform Reed development into a force for community good. The road wouldn't be easy. Wellington would fight him at every turn, and many still viewed his transformation with skepticism. But for tonight, in this warm kitchen with these two remarkable women, Maxwell Reed was exactly where he belonged. Not controlling, not perfect, but present and authentic, the man he was always meant to be. And somewhere he liked to think Catherine was smiling.